Hey everyone! So after replaying chapter 4, I noticed something weird about the prophecy. To be more specific, something weird about this supposed dark prince. So when we see this prince from the dark in chapter 1 and 4, we always see him wearing a cloak and these pointy boots. Now this is obviously supposed to be Ralsei, but Ralsei doesn't really wear this cloak. He only wears it once in chapter 1 in the beginning of the game. And it's also interesting to note that Ralsei doesn't really wear boots, and even in chapter 1 we don't really see those boots. I also don't see why Ralsei would wear this again so long after, especially after his full reveal in the ending of chapter 1. Another interesting thing to note is that in the prophecies, this Prince from the Dark always seems to have some kind of flames around him, something that Ralsei doesn't really use. Well, he only uses one attack once in chapter 4, and it's not even a damaging move, and it's really just for one single enemy. That's pretty much just a candle. Now this might be a little far-fetched and I might be completely wrong about this, but I think it's interesting to know that Ralsei is still called the Lonely Prince in the prophecy, even though he has a lot of friends now that care about him. Now this could just be because he still feels lonely, or because he can't go out of the Dark World, but I think it's just interesting to point out. Now Ralsei in chapter 2 tells us that every Darkener after the roaring will turn into stone. And since Ralsei is a Darkener, it's fair to assume that he will also turn into stone. So I think it's really weird that after the roaring, as the prophecy says, 3 heroes will appear. And one of them is Ralsei supposedly, but Ralsei cannot be there since, well, it would be stone at that point. I know that Ralsei functions differently from every other Darkener, but Ralsei tells us that every Darkener will turn into stone, and Lightners, specifically Lightners, will be left to fend for themselves. It could also be that part of the tragedy we see in chapter 4 in the prophecy is that Ralsei might die, or just petrify forever, indefinitely. So one of my friends brought up the idea that Ralsei is similar to Azrael in name and in looks, because he's trying to fill in the role of Azrael, kinda like how in chapter 4 he says he tried to be nice and everything, as in a way to change the prophecy. So maybe he's made to look like Azrael to also either fulfill the prophecy or just change it altogether. Now this is part of the theory that's a little bit more far-fetched, but I think I have a good candidate for who the third hero is in the prophecy. And I think that is Azrael Dreamer. Now the reason why I believe that is because the Dreamer family in Deltarune all have the royal kind of theme to them. As we see in chapter 3, Tori is sitting on a throne and she's wearing a crown. And Asgore in chapter 4 in the prophecies, one of the hidden prophecy, is called the Flower King and is also wearing a crown. That would always make Azrael a prince, and I think this also ties pretty well with Undertale, obviously. In the ending of the True Pacifist run in Undertale, Azrael Dreamer uses flame attacks, which is kinda like how the Prince from Dark in the prophecy has flames around them. Also in chapter 3 we find out that Azrael's favorite Dragon Blaze character is the Sword Magician. Now the Dragon Blaze characters seem to be pretty relevant to the heroes in the prophecy, as in the secret boss fight in chapter 4, Gerson compares Susie to one of Dragon Blaze's characters. And we learn that Dragon Blazers is actually based off a book that Gerson himself wrote, and it's called Lord of the Hammer. So it makes sense that the Prince from the Dark in the prophecy is able to use magic, as we see flames around them. And I think that ties well with Azrael's favorite character being the Sword Magician. I think it's also kind of interesting to point out that Azrael in Undertale uses swords, and he kind of just summons them from his hand, you know, Sword Magician. Now there's another reference to Azrael in the prophecy, and this might be a little far-fetched because it's just something that Deltarune used in the past. It's a prophecy that reads, "Below on hopes and dreams, they send 3 years at the world's end." I think hopes and dreams could be a reference to Azrael, or is it just, again, kind of just a word that they use because the game uses the word hope, and well, there's also an entire soundtrack just called Filled Hopes and Dreams. But I think it's just also interesting to point out. Now in chapter 4 we learn about these new descriptions for the heroes. Chris is the cage with human soul and parts, and Susie is the girl with a love crossed on her heart. While the prince still remains the lonely prince from the dark, which I think is really weird. And the way I attribute this to Azrael is that he might be just kind of lonely since he's in college, or it could be that when we meet Azrael, he is just the prince, obviously as explained it before, but he is coming from the dark. Maybe he'll just come from a place of pure darkness, or well, more concentrated darkness. Either way, I've seen some people state that Azrael is actually hiding in shelter, and I think that kind of also ties into Azrael being a prince from the dark, because well, the shelter, as we see in the ending of chapter 3, has an open fountain. Either way, even if you don't think this is Azrael, I think there's enough proof that Ralsei could not be the third hero in the prophecy. I think there really is something here, and I just can't really find more about this, but I think what I presented is just kind of enough to at least give the idea that there's something more going on. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. It's kind of the first time I ever did something like this, so I'm sorry if it's a little rough. I kind of went through many different drafts, and I even recorded a full audio that was way longer than this one, but I ended up just hating it because it was kind of just over explained, and it was just for no reason, and just 1 minute of explaining why I think this is real. I even wrote a script for this, but after a couple of days of just sitting on it and rereading and fixing it, I kind of realized that I work better without a script. So I kind of just went to a more casual way, and I think that works better just because there isn't that much proof to this, but I still think there is enough to make just a small video about it. So yeah, I'm sorry if it's really rough, but I will try to do better if there is anything else that I come up with. But thank you for watching the video. Bye bye.